Ahead of Time, as you know, is a film chronicling the life journey of the amazing Ruth Gruber. Ruth Gruber was a photojournalist and foreign correspondent who escorted Holocaust refugees to America on a secret wartime mission, covered the Nuremberg trials, and documented the journey of those aboard the Exodus ship in 1947, among many other incredible things. As I said, we're so fortunate to have the producers with us. We have Zeva Oelbaum, the producer of the film. She is an award-winning documentary filmmaker and still photographer. She has presented her films in venues all over the world, including the Westminster Palace in London and the National Gallery in DC. Doris Schechter, the executive producer, was born in Vienna and was forced to flee Austria for Italy. She and her family eventually settled in the United States, where Doris opened a bakery, which grew to become a full restaurant called My Most Favorite Food. Our moderators for the night are our own Rachel Shnay and Sarita Szerer. Rachel is the co-chair of YLA, and Sarita is actively involved in the Jewish community and Holocaust education initiatives in Panama. Again, throughout the entire program, as you probably heard us say in the background, which we were not aware was occurring, you can all write in the chat if you see where you're able to write in the chat below. If you type any of your questions in there, then I will take those and relay them to our moderators and our lovely producer guests, and we will try to get to all of your questions. So to kick it off, our moderators. Thank you.
Hi guys, hi everyone, welcome. We're so excited about this. I hope you all had a chance to watch the film. It was really an incredible way to really see firsthand about Ruth Gruber's life. We all fell in love with her from our first book club, which was Raquela, and we fell in love with Raquela, and we obviously fell in love with the woman behind Raquela, so it's fascinating to see all this, I believe. So I just want to ask the first question, and also, I don't know if any of you read Haven, but a lot of this this Ahead of Time has to do with that book, so I thought it was great to do both at the same time. So let me just ask the first question. How long did it take to make the film? Did your vision for the film change over the course of the filmmaking process?
Okay, so I'm fine to answer that. Well, Doris, of course, knows the length of time that people have been talking to Ruth Gruber about making a documentary about her. And I think that strung out over many years. But when Doris and her co-executive producers decided to move forward, it took 1 year and it took 4 months of research and 1 year of shooting and post-production. So it was a very fast turnaround. Partly was motivated by the fact that when we started shooting, Ruth was 96 years old.
And what was her reaction when you told her that you wanted to make this film about her?
Well, that would be Doris would answer that question.
Yeah, Doris, tell us a little bit about your relationship to Ruth, and then just going into this.
The beginning. I was 6 years old when I arrived in Port Ontario in Oswego, and it was a very tumultuous time. My father had passed away, and for me, Oswego was a very sad time in my life because of the death of my father. And we really didn't have that much connection with Ruth. And one year at a Hanukkah party, my friend Fred Schwartz, who was Fred the Furrier, said to me, I met somebody that you should meet. Her name is Ruth Gruber. And he met her at the opening of the Safe Haven Museum in Albany. And it was at a Hanukkah party, and my daughter said to me, are you going to call her? And I said, for what? You know, that was a long time ago, and very painful memories, and I don't think so. So she said, well, I'm going to call her. And she did. And she said it was so extraordinary. And at that time, I had my restaurant on Madison Avenue. And my daughter called her up and said, hi, my name is Laura Schechter Chess, and you brought my mother to the United States. And we met for lunch on Madison Avenue, and that was it. We bonded immediately. She invited me to come to her house. I wanted to look at all the photographs. And as I was sitting in her living room, I was bawling my eyes out, and she understood where my pain came from. And from then on, we were the closest of friends. And we spoke every single day. We did what do you call it, author lunch with her when my book, My Most Favorite Dessert Company cookbook came out. And I mean, so many fabulous stories. We went to Chicago. It was an extraordinary experience. I had introduced her. And then we went to Israel together. We went to Poland together. And throughout this whole length of time, she was so influential and was such an extraordinary mentor. And all through that time, people were calling her and say, we want to make a documentary about you. And one by one, we had to, things didn't happen. And then somebody wanted to do it, and they started working on it. And then my friend, Patty Kenner, said to me, you know what, enough is enough. Let's see if we can do it. So I said, oh, okay, because Zeva was, you know, is the most fabulous photographer, and she did the photography for my first book. And she was also involved in a great documentary called Renee and I. And we said, well, who's going to do this film? So I said, well, my friend Zeva Oelbaum is also involved with films. So we all got together, and it was very magical. I mean, there were plenty of stories that went on with that also, the ins and outs. And finally, Ruth had to make the decision of who she wanted to do this film. And thank goodness she picked Zeva Oelbaum, who is without a doubt one of the most extraordinary filmmakers and interviewers and researchers. And I remembered when she presented the trailer,
Yeah.
we were so mesmerized, it took our breath away. So Zeva, we were so fortunate that we had Zeva and Bob Richmond, who were the extraordinary two people with their talent and their respect and their love for Ruth and everything that she did.
Wow, can you just backtrack a little bit and tell us, because I don't know if everyone here knows, where you were born and then how you ended up going on that ship with Ruth Gruber, and what a few memories from the ship that you remember. I know it was a hard time, but obviously extremely difficult, but if you just have any memories, because there's photos in this book, and you're on I have the book right here, and you're on the list right there on the bottom. There's your name of the people that came on that ship. So just tell us a little bit about where you came from, your parents.
All right, I was born in Vienna in 1938, and my mother still, you know, used to tell me that she would stand on her balcony of the hospital, and she was so scared. It was so scary. And it was a very difficult time. As a matter of fact, she said when she would walk me in the park, she was not allowed to sit on a bench because she was Jewish. And my father understood that this was not a place to be as a Jew in Vienna. So he went from embassy to embassy, and everyone said no to him until he finally got a visa to go to Italy, a temporary visa. And he went first, and then my mother and her baby, me, went to Italy. And there we were interned. We were free prisoners of Mussolini. And we lived in this most gorgeous little town, a medieval town in the center of Italy, between the mountains and the sea. And there, once the Nazis marched into Guardia Grele, which was the name of the town, we had to be on the run. because my mother was pregnant and we didn't know where to go or what to do. And we went from town to town, from farm to farm. And finally, my father decided that there was a way out, and we followed a group of Italian refugees, and we crossed the front to get to the Allied sector. And that was a very dangerous walking. And my father wrote in his memoir that we had to follow in the footsteps of the Italians because the front is where the minefields are. So we had to be very, very careful. Here, my mother was with a newborn infant, and there I was, a little 5-year-old. And I lost my shoes, and my father wrote that I never complained or grumbled. I just went on and on. And we ended up in Bari, and there my father worked for the United States Army as a translator during speeches. And I think that's where he found out that President Roosevelt invited 1,000 refugees to come to the United States of America as guests of the government. And my parents had to sign a paper saying that once the war is over, we would have to go back to where we came from. And there was, people came, thousands of people came and applied to get on that ship. So I imagine because my father worked for the United States Army, that it was easier for him to get on the boat. The only thing that I remember from the boat was that I was so seasick that I never was able to lift my head from my mother's lap. Those were the most poignant memories. And then when we arrived in the United States, a photographer took a picture of me. And what happened was they gave me a hot dog to eat. Now, I don't think that I ever had a hot dog in Italy. And even in the photo, I looked really bewildered. And because of that photo went throughout 26 states in the 26 newspapers throughout the United States. And one morning, my mother's sister, who was going to work, she had gotten to the United States a year or two earlier, opened up the newspaper, and there I was. She had no idea what happened to her sister, her husband, her brother-in-law, and her little niece. So that was quite extraordinary that we were found by my mother's family.
I just wanted to interject the really interesting sort of story that when we were looking at archival footage for the film, we found Doris. Doris is actually, as a little kid, as a little 6-year-old, she's in the film, sticking her head out of the train window on her way to Oswego. Curly hair little girl is actually Doris. And that was so exciting for us.
Wow.
The filmmaking team, we loved that.
Are you referring to that very famous photo that is, I know that there's a very famous photo of a girl sticking her head out the window of the train that I know I associate with the journey. Is maybe I'm
not sure. I don't know if it's, I just know she's in that footage. I don't know if it's a famous frame or not.
And Doris, do you remember anything about being on that ship for the few weeks that you were on?
You know what? It's amazing. No, except that that was a very vivid memory of feeling so sick.
Yeah, they say that in the book that so everyone was so seasick and.
Mm-hmm. But you know what? My mother did tell me a story. She said that you would go from soldier to soldier and would ask if anyone had an extra shirt that I could give to my father. Kind of precocious to be able to do that. But I think that it was a very bewildering time coming off a very frightening journey. And because I remembered one of the most vivid memories that I have is that when walking, through the front, and we ended up being in a cave, and the terrain there was very, very, very hilly, very mountainous. And I remember to this day when I said, I guess to my parents, run, run, the Nazis are coming after us. So these were very scary, unbelievable times for a child.
I'm terrified. I mean, it's beyond terrifying.
Doris, can you tell us about your father and what ended up happening?
Well, my father, I was always a very good child, and he promised to, in order to make sure that I was quiet and I did everything that I was supposed to under such treacherous times, that he promised that we would start a whole new life in the United States of America. And that was really something to look forward to. But then suddenly, he contracted spinal meningitis and he died in 24 hours. So to add trauma to trauma, that was something that I still to this day haven't overcome. And for me, the most important journey for me was to realize the American dream. And also when I got married when I was 18 and I have 5 children, and I realized that it was important that I had to be able to be self-sufficient, because we had a dream, we had a very privileged life. We lived in Kings Point and Great Neck. My children grew up there, and we were of a privileged family. And then I realized that when my kids grew up that I had to do something. So I turned an avocation into a vocation. And I realized that I was very talented in doing recipes and baking, which was a love that I had. And I opened up a little bakery in Great Neck called My Most Favorite Dessert Company. And then I have to tell you this, that my father's family lived up in Washington Heights. They all had come before he did. And he snuck out of the camp to visit his mother, his father, and all of his cousins that he grew up with in Vienna. They all lived in the same vicinity. And my father fell in love with New York City. And he was so looking forward to starting his life in New York. And then he died suddenly. And I think that as a child, you feel for some reason that I was, that I felt guilty. And even emotionally, intellectually, I knew that I didn't kill my father, but emotionally, I always felt responsible. So when I decided to open up my restaurant on the Upper East Side, because I had to come to New York City, and could you imagine the rents at that time, and I decided that I was going to take that step and do it. And for me, when I decided that I would go under supervision so that everyone could eat under my roof, and I think, Rachel, your parents used to come to me all the time.
Rachel's a big baker as well. And I think, Doris, your story represents so many of the other stories of all the other refugees that came on that ship. Mm-hmm. And Zeva, I wanted to ask you, what were some of the challenges in making the documentary, especially with Ruth and her age? Were there any topics that were off limits?
Oh, yes.
The production of this?
That's a great story, actually. Well, one of the first, there was a topic that was off limits, but I will explain how we got around that. But the first thing I would mention is that one of the challenges one of the fantastic things about Ruth, but also one of the challenges, was that she saved everything. So in her dining room in her apartment, it was piled floor to ceiling with boxes and boxes and boxes of material. Some was labeled, some wasn't labeled. It was mostly labeled in a sort of a bit of a haphazard way. For example, my favorite folder was labeled wedding proposals. And she literally had a folder of people who had written to her asking her to marry them. And one was fantastic. One was, if, you know, here I'm enclosing, you're so brilliant, you're so amazing. I'm enclosing a photograph of myself, and I'm the guy on the right. If you don't like the way I look, my brother is on the left, and he'd like to marry you also. So it was fantastic for someone like myself who loves archives. But the challenge, of course, is where to find the story. So that was both our incredible surplus and bonus and pleasure and our challenge. But the one thing that was off limits was Ruth was very much against us talking about how she was accused of being a communist. And we're talking decades and decades after everyone else involved was long gone, and no one could hurt her about this topic, but she had been so traumatized by the idea, by being accused of being a communist. But I felt, as did the director, but I think I was a little pushy about it, that it was imperative for us to include her being accused as a communist, because the whole film is about how people's governments turn against them. But that happened in the United States as well. So I felt it was really important. So if you remember the scene where she is in the archives with Harold Ickes Jr., and he's, you know, we had sort of given him all that material to refer to in his conversation with Ruth when we were filming it. So we put in the thing about her being accused of being a communist, and the camera was rolling. And we had told her that if she really didn't want it to be in, we would respect her wishes. But we also spoke and lobbied with her son, David Michaels, and explained why we felt it was so important. And in the end, she was perfectly fine for us to include it. But that's a great question that you asked.
I'd like to also ask you about, you mentioned so much when she was young and a student, her love of Germany and the German culture and the German, you know, way of scholarship and everything. Did that change for her after the war? Her perception of them?
I'm not I don't think so. I think what she loved about Germany, the literature and the music, I think stayed consistent. The other challenge I will mention to you is that Ruth had told these stories many, many times. She was a fabulous public speaker. And so we asked her questions that she had already had, like her patent answers. But Bob Richmond, the director of the film, was so skillful in how he got her to answer the questions and tell these stories in a really fresh way, that it didn't sound canned. It didn't sound like she had said it 100 times before. So that was amazing. I think that she continued to value and love the German culture that she, that was alive and well when she was in Germany in the early 1930s.
Right. I keep envisioning that scene in the film where she was actually, when she was still a student there, and she attended one of Hitler's rallies. It was just like, it's crazy. I don't know of any other person. I mean, I might not know at all enough about like this specific part, that Americans who went in and out and in and out. It's just like fascinating to me. It's crazy.
Well, what really appealed to us about about the story, I mean, Ruth was one of the most incredible people for so many different reasons, but we had to choose a story. You know, there had to be a narrative for the film to have legs. And the thing that was really amazing about her is that she was one of the few people who saw the evolution of Nazism, the expression of Nazism, and then the end and the justice that was met against the Nazis by attending the Nuremberg trials. So
Right.
she really went full circle, and the establishment of the State of Israel.
So tell us a little bit about the Nuremberg trials and maybe a few details that didn't get into the documentary about it.
Well, she was a visitor of the Nuremberg trials. She didn't cover them as a journalist. So she didn't write that much about the Nuremberg trials. We didn't speak to her that much about the Nuremberg trials because she was there. And Doris, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but my understanding is that, you know, she did not have an official capacity, so she was there for a brief time, maybe one day. So she didn't really talk that much about the Nuremberg trials, although she did have them in her diary written, Nuremberg trials.
Right. For everyone who's watching who might not didn't connect the dots yet or is a little confused, this book, Haven, that was written by Ruth Gruber, is all about a ship of 1,000 Jewish refugees that left from Italy to America. And Doris, who's in this Zoom right now, is one of those survivors that was given the incredible luck of the draw. I don't even know what you call it. 1,000 Jews out of millions that were able to come on this boat. And so she's here, and we're so lucky to have her. And the two of them together created this film that was sent out to you guys, and I hope you all were able to watch it, about the incredible Ruth Gruber, who happens to have also written a bunch of other books, including Raquella, which we all read and discussed together. So there's a lot of connections. I just wanted to like connect everything together.
There's also,
I'm just fascinated. I'm honestly like starstruck a little bit from Doris, because yes, she even, you know, I lived across the street, grew up across the street from her restaurant that ended up moving to the West Side. But for me, I just love the fact, I love meeting survivors and people, and just knowing who they are by face and by what they do, and seeing them on their everyday life, but then actually hearing the story behind their lives and how they got here. It's so incredible and fascinating, and I never would have known. And now every time I go eat at my most favorite, which is by far a very delicious restaurant, everyone should go, my most favorite food on 72nd Street, it's just incredible to know the journey that you came to actually get to that point.
What's
and
amazing,
it's amazing.
I don't know if you remember, 2 years ago, we were celebrating my grandmother's birthday at your restaurant, and you approached me and said you'd like to come to Panama to show the film.
Right.
And I tried to, you know, see who would be interested in making it happen, but I felt a little bit powerless because I wasn't really very active in any of the organizations at the time. And then we read Raquel a few months ago, and I'm thinking, Ruth Gruber, I know that name. And I put the name in my email search, and your name came up, and I said, this is incredible. I can't believe it. It had to take me 2 years to read this book and to fall in love with this woman. And we're so grateful, really, that we could make it happen online while everybody's at home now. So really incredible.
It's amazing.
Question about, I mean, first of all, the part of the film that talks about specifically the Exodus, and when Ruth with the captain, who was 23 years old at the time, but was 85 or almost 86 when she met with him, thinking on his name. But that whole part and showing her recounting that entire journey, I have to admit, I rewatched it times because, first of all, I basically couldn't stop crying when they retold the part about singing Hatikva and how they would never be defeated. But the way one of the survivors, I think this was actually not from that journey, but from before, but it was mixed in with that part, was someone who referred to, they described Ruth as someone who felt the burn. She said that.
Oh, this is Manya.
Yes. And that really struck me. She said, and I think when Rachel, Sarita, and I were talking about the empathy that Ruth Gruber had, where did that come from? Was it part of her, did her parents raise her that way? Was it just she was made that way? Was it her Judaism? But the fact that, for those of you who weren't able to watch it, basically, Survivor is explaining how this was, Ruth really got them to speak about their experiences, because this was them leaving that world behind. And many of them, at least the men, said, how can we tell you these things? The things are too horrible. How can we tell a young woman? And not just because she was a woman, although that's an interesting aspect, that she was a pioneer of feminism at this time, but everything, it was so horrible. Why would anyone want to recount these things? But then Ruth told them, you are the first people, it is through you as witnesses that the world, that America and the rest of the world will really learn of the atrocities committed by Hitler and the Nazis and all of their collaborators. So they said that through Ruth, they felt comfortable to speak, but not only that, they felt that if two people are sitting by the fire, I might get this wrong, and one burns their hand, the other one knows they burned it, but they don't feel it. But Ruth felt it. She felt the burn. And I was just so curious, was she always that empathetic, or was it something she developed through her journey?
Jill, let me tell you a little story, okay? Ruth was being honored by the Holocaust Museum of Washington that had their, what do you call it again? A group in Chicago. They had a sister group in Chicago. And they wanted to take her for brunch to meet all of these different people, that were so interested in her. So they called her up and they said, we're going to have a brunch for you at the Waldorf Astoria. And she said, what does the Waldorf Astoria have anything to do with me? If you are going to have a brunch, you're going to have it at my friend Doris Schechter's, my most favorite dessert company. At that time, it was on in the what do you call it again? Times Square, in the theater district. And that's what we did. And they all came and they had the most wonderful time. And because of that, then Ruth, and I'm not a public speaker, but Ruth made me get up to speak. And she told me then, she said, Doris, don't worry about speaking. When you speak, speak from your heart. So that was a tremendous lesson that she taught me. And these people from Chicago were so extraordinary. And my first book just came out, which, by the way, Zeva did all the fabulous photographs because she's such a fabulous photographer. And they asked Ruth and I to be the speakers at this gala that they were having in Chicago, where 1,500 people came. It was quite a day.
Wow.
So that was Ruth.
I can sort of add to that in that there were many occasions that I went to Ruth and said, I've been reading in your diaries or read in your books how you were so close to your friend from the 8th grade, and then she would immediately, within 5 minutes, find that friend's son who lives in San Francisco, his phone number. She did that over and over and over. So she is someone who was totally as connected to people as she seems like she was. She really valued people and respected people. And that was really evident throughout the process of producing the film.
Right. And I feel like the survivors couldn't have been luckier in the sense to have her on that ship, because they were the first American Jewish woman that they encountered. They couldn't even believe that she was Jewish in the beginning. And it's just crazy to me because if you look in the book, you see that a lot of the survivors still had their prisoner uniforms on. They really were coming from the lowest of the low. And here she was teaching them English, speaking to them, listening to their stories. And we were discussing this before, but the theme of survivors when they came to America or any country they came to after the war was that they really were shunned in the sense of not speaking about what they went through to family members. They didn't want them to scare the other family members. They didn't want to hear about it, maybe because the family members that were safe felt guilty in a sense, or, it was kind of just like, move on with your life. We don't want to hear about it and keep going. And it's really, I know my grandparents are all survivors, and I know my parents, like, they knew about it and they heard about it and this and that. And like, obviously their parents were very different from the other parents, but they didn't really hear the stories until I would say the 80s or the 90s when their grandchildren were born, like me and Jill and Sarita, and like how we would want to hear from our grandparents, whether it was that or the grandparents, the survivors felt that their grandchildren were kind of steering away from Judaism or from Israel from Holocaust remembrance. And they really realized that, okay, now's the time we really have to make sure that you guys remember. So we were just discussing how their first interaction with a Jewish person was somebody who really wanted to hear their stories and remember and write it down and spread it to everyone that she encountered. She's a journalist. But then it quickly goes to, them coming to America, and things are very different then. And we just wanted to know if Ruth spoke about this transition of how the survivors were heard from her, but then kind of unheard or not listened. They were, I don't even know if that's the phrase, but they were not given the right, like kavod, like respect, in the sense that nobody really wanted to hear what they went through after. It's kind of like this, like, few decades of that silence.
Can I just tell you a very quick story? I told you that when my daughter brought Ruth to the restaurant on Madison Avenue to have lunch, and that's where we bonded immediately. And then when I went back to her house, and I was looking at all the photographs, trying to connect perhaps with something, like maybe my mother or my sister or someone. And I'm sitting there and crying my eyes out. And you know what she said to me? You have every right to cry. You lost your country, you lost your language, and you lost your father. Now, speaking, she really felt the burn, as I think Jill said. So I found that so moving and so to the point.
Yeah, just to answer your question more directly, I never actually had a conversation with Ruth about that, but it's a really interesting question, because that is such a contrast between her willingness to get people to tell their stories and what they discovered, in the States when they
right. Because I don't think it was really till the Eichmann trials, actually, 1967, right? Or 61, that people even, you see those pictures of sitting in the trials and this people crying because they actually listened to the raw, real testimony of the survivors that were really, shunned until then. But Ruth was on the boat, and I loved reading about how she was just like frantically writing down as much as she could, and storing it in her little cell where she was sleeping, and she couldn't get enough of the stories, and how those documents actually made a huge impact in the future. I don't where exactly they were sent after to the government. They were sent to very high people, and I'm so in awe of her. It's like unbelievable. She's really just like
amazing.
Incredible. Yeah. And I don't know, you were saying, Doris, earlier, maybe if you want to tell everyone that there was a possible production that was happening that might still happen. I don't know if that's a secret or not. But
what had happened was there was someone that came to the building that I live in and bought an apartment here, and she had to be interviewed, and we were interviewing her, and it turns out that she's a Broadway producer. And I said, and I heard, oh, a Broadway producer, how fabulous. So I could kind of coerce her to come into my living room to show her what was being done, you know, in the renovation. And I said, listen, you're a Broadway producer? And she said, yes. And I said, what did you produce? She said, Jersey Boys, Come From Away, and a bunch of others. And I said, oh my God. I said, do you know about the Oswego story? So she said, no. I said, well, a friend of mine did a musical for Oswego and was very involved with Ruth Gruber. And I would love for you to touch base with him because he would love to put that show on Broadway. And so then after that, we came back to the dining room, you know, to continue the meeting. And she did get in touch with Bill Goldstein. But she, like you girls, fell in love with Ruth Gruber from beginning to end and read all of her books. And she was so taken by her that she decided it didn't work out with Bill Goldstein's musical for various reasons, but she started production of doing the Oswego story, which was so thrilling and exciting because Ruth always said that Oswego was the best kept secret in the United States of America. And but then unfortunately the pandemic started, so they had to put it on hold because Broadway won't be open until 2021. So and I thought for Ruth this would be so unbelievable.
We have a question from participant Heather Nenner. I hope I pronounced that correctly. She says, hi Doris, so much admiration for you being a survivor. My 14-year-old daughter is here. And she says that, by the way, that daughter is the granddaughter of Heather's father, who fought in World War II and in the 1948 War of Independence in Israel. So she wants to know, is there something you could tell her 14-year-old daughter that you feel is very important about being a survivor?
Okay, I think what's very important to me, because one thing, the thing that was so important for me coming to the United States was that here I could be Jewish and be proud of it. You know what I mean? I didn't have to hide. I could be who I am because here we are in the land of the free and people aren't really prejudiced. So I think what was important was that when I opened up my restaurant, actually when I opened up my bakery in Great Neck, we had belonged to the Great Neck Synagogue, and I was friendly with Rabbi Wolf. And he said to me, Doris, would you close on Shabbos? And I said, it's not my way of life. I said, however, one thing I will promise you, I will never have anything non-kosher in my, and you can come and check all the ingredients. So that was the decision that we made together. But when I moved to Madison Avenue and decided that I would open up a restaurant, we started off as a dessert company, but I had to pay my rent, so we had to evolve into the restaurant business. I decided that I wanted everyone to eat under my roof. And I decided that that means every part of the Jewish community, whether you were Orthodox or conservative or Reformed. So I decided that I would go under supervision because I wanted everyone to be able to eat there. And that's when I decided the only thing that I will have will be vegetarian items on my menu. And when we first started, we started off with the complete Italian menu. Because my father, may rest in peace, never ever compromised his dietary laws while he was in Italy. And he used to sing a song, Montag pasta, Dienstag pasta, Mittwoch wieder mal pasta, which means he had pasta Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and again on Thursday. And that he did. So doing that, I was honoring my father, that he never compromised his Jewish identity. So I felt that I had to do the same thing.
That's so beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Just like Ruth, that she was such a proud Jewish woman
She was.
and loved every Jew
Mm-hmm.
unconditionally.
Mm-hmm.
What would she tell you about, Judaism and Israel and anti-Semitism? What would she talk about with you in your many
My daughter, my oldest daughter, had a dream that she would be able to go to Israel with Ruth and I. And one day Ruth called up and said, okay, Laura's dream is going to come true. You're going to come to Israel with me. And that was so extraordinary, to go to Israel and stay at Mishkanot, in Jerusalem, in the windmill section. I don't know if you know that gorgeous area. And stayed at the hotel where she wrote Raquella. All right.
Wow.
And
Was that the Mount Zion Hotel?
no, it was Mishkanot, where all
that was the name of the
artists,
hotel.
all the artists.
Oh yeah, because that's Yamin Moshe area. Yeah.
It's not far from.
Yamin Moshe.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. And so that's where we went. It was so extraordinary. Now my daughter said, "I'm not going near the West Bank." And Ruth would say, "Are you kidding? Of course we're going to go that way." So she was fearless.
We went to Saudi Arabia.
And for us to be with Ruth in Israel and to see Israel through Ruth's eyes was unbelievable.
And I know a lot of our readers here and our guests here are really obsessed with Raquella. We all fell in love with Raquella. So can you tell us a little bit about how her relationship with Raquella, like about the writing of that book, whatever you know about that?
Yeah, I think that what happened, there were so many people that came to Ruth and said, oh, you have to write about my wife or this woman. They are the face of Israel, the woman of Israel. And then she met Raquella Prius, and she knew that she was the one that she was going to write about. And they had a very close relationship. And the world is so small that Saul, my friend, whose brother is Elon Troen, who was also a professor and was a dean at Ben Gurion University, he was very good friends with Raquella and her husband. So, we're all so intertwined. We all have 6 degrees of separation. But for Ruth, Raquella was the woman that she wrote about because she so admired her. And she felt that she was truly the face of Israel.
So that's actually a perfect transition. We have another question. And Doris, you just talked about how, how people kept asking Ruth to write about their family and how she decided to write about Raquella. So this question is for Zeva from this 11. She says, Zeva, how do you choose whose life to highlight? What will your next documentary be? You did an incredible job telling Ruth's story. We all wished we knew her.
Oh, that's so great. Well, it was such an amazing experience on so many levels to do the film on Ruth. And I had sort of dabbled in film before, but as Doris said, I was a still photographer with a studio in the photo district. Really, I was full force still photographer. But I did a very deep dive, obviously, on this film. And in fact, the editor of Ahead of Time, Sabina Krahenbuhl, and I worked so well together that we actually formed a production company, and we did a film about another incredible woman. That film was called Letters from Baghdad. That was about Gertrude Bell, who was an extraordinary British explorer and diplomat. And that film got really wide exposure, and it was on PBS and BBC, and it was all over the world, actually. And we are now working on another film about a woman named Loie Fuller, who is an incredible inventor. And she was the American inventor of modern dance, an incredibly famous woman at the turn of the century. And she also invented stage lighting. So what we like, and we just got an NEH grant for the Loie Fuller film. So what we really look for, what we like to do, is a woman who is incredibly well-rounded and who checks a lot of boxes, has a rich, deep history, and her impact can be seen across a really wide range. So that, and Ruth was like, sort of launched us, the two of us, into that direction. And the thing that was so remarkable is that, you know, Ruth was one of these people who she would tell you many times, you know, if you opened a door, Ruth would walk through it pretty reliably. She was very, you know, she was willing to take risks, and her career reflected that on so many levels. And so I think that all of us in the production were, you know, sort of took a page out of her book. I had never produced a film. Doris had never executive produced a film. The director was a friend of mine. He was a cinematographer. He'd never directed a film before. So it was a first for all of us, except for Ruth. She was herself.
Where did she find that confidence, that, you know, fearlessness during the time she was growing up, like in Brooklyn? Where did that come from?
I think we felt that it came from a very close and supportive relationship with her father. I think that's, I mean, we can't say for sure, but that was sort of our thinking. Do you agree with that, Doris?
Oh, absolutely. Even in the film, she always felt that her father was a forward thinker.
Right.
Right? And he would say to her, well, if God forbid something happened to your husband, what would you do? So you have to really make sure that you do have a career. But he wasn't so happy about being a writer.
He was thinking school teacher.
Right.
Yeah. I think any parent wants their little Jewish daughter going to Europe in the midst of World War II.
Yes, crazy.
Exactly.
Or
without a cell phone.
I love the story of when she was about to go to Italy to embark on this journey, and her mother showed up with a chicken for Shabbat, and was so worried. And Secretary X told her, "Don't worry, we're making her a general." Like, if
I love the way she says that.
And she said it was so nice.
They're making me a general. It's great.
You're right. She was very supported and loved.
Do you know, because she also, when she spent time in Alaska with the Eskimos, do you know how, well, I don't know if you could really say if she, well, did she go back? Did she ever keep in touch with anyone? How did that impact going forward? I know it'd be hard to keep in touch since she talked about the bubble, and that really calmed her down, and she felt that rather than trying to attack everything next, be patient. And
yes, she didn't talk to us. I never had a conversation with her about the people that she met in Alaska. I mean, of course, she was very close with Harold Ickes and Harold Ickes Jr., as you saw in the film. But in terms of the people that she was connected to there, she never really spoke that much about it. But the footage was totally one of the highlights.
Yeah.
It was extraordinary.
Did she ever have a need or want to move to Israel permanently, or she wanted to stay in America?
No, I think that she was a true New Yorker.
did she have close relationships with like the future prime ministers post 1948? Like any, you know, was she in close contact or?
Well, she was friendly with
Shimon Peres, right?
Ben Gurion. I have to tell you one quick story. When I went to Israel a couple of years ago, Saul's brother, Ilan Troen, was the head of the Ben Gurion archives, okay? So he said, Doris, I have a surprise for you. I want you to meet the, what was he, the curator? The curator. And he went through a lot of the diaries to see whether he could find Ruth in there. And sure enough, he found 2 instances where Ben Gurion said, Ruth Gruber is so interested in one of the projects that I'm doing that she wants to work with me. And to me, it was so thrilling to think, oh my God, here, what? The project, what was it? Oh, about the Ethiopian Jews. So she was so thrilled about that. She said, I want to work with you on it. And then there was another writing when he said, Ruth Gruber came to visit me today. And it blew my mind to think that here I was so close with Ruth that she was such a good friend of Ben Gurion. I mean, I thought, wow. What?
The second story, that woman.
Oh, right. And when he said that woman, Ruth Gruber, was here. So to me, that was so wonderful that she goes back to such an important time in history.
Was that her, when she went to Israel in the trip, in the film, was that her last trip to Israel? Or?
What? No.
No, she went after, so because she was 9 then, right?
Well, when we went to Israel together was quite a while ago. No, but this was when I went a couple of years ago, and Saul's brother said I made an appointment for you to meet the curator of the archives.
It was the trip that you took, the one that's shown with her and the captain. Was that her last trip to Israel, or?
I think so. See,
Yeah.
right? I think that's what it was. That was her
That would
last.
have been 2008.
Wow.
What?
2008, because that's when we filmed those scenes.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's interesting, just I'll tell a very fast story. Someone had actually, Nancy Fisher actually, had given me a documentary, a French documentary on the Exodus. And I looked at it almost like a casting DVD and decided, I saw Mordechai Rossman, I saw Ike Aronowitz, and, those were the people we wanted to interview, of course, but there was the other person who we wanted to interview in that documentary was someone who you could see on the boat underneath the flag that they had painted the swastika on. And that gentleman was in this French documentary, but by the time we were filming in 2008, he was in the hospital. And that would have been amazing because he was like right in the center of Ruth's photograph. But we couldn't get him.
Wow. Wow. Well, this is all so amazing. Thank you so much. I'll leave to Rachie, Sarita, if you want to ask anything else. I just know that we are so appreciative, and this not only to have you join us, but to be able to watch that film. It was such a treat, and as everyone knows, that was really special that we were able to send you that link with the producers themselves with their permission, and of course, like everyone, to respect and honor the privacy of that. And as I'm sure we all will, but I know it made me feel really special to get that link with the password, and then of course to hear from you guys yourselves. It's really incredible hearing from people who are so close with Ruth and who were so involved in everything. I mean, Doris, of course, you are so.
I have to tell you one more thing of how fortunate I was to have her in my life. that when she was dying, I went up to 300 Central Park West, and I was there holding her hand when she died. So that was,
Wow.
you know, saying goodbye. Yeah.
Doris and Zeva, thank you for introducing us to this incredible woman.
Yeah.
We to know more about her, more about you and your incredible work. I want to thank you, Jill, for and Yad Vashem leadership for putting this together. I'm sure that future projects are going to be incredible as well. And thank you, Rachel. You're an incredible advocate for education. So I'm humbled to be in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.